time to save our sanity, because our sanity has been overridden by just utter ridiculousness when it comes to topics like mental health, self-esteem, self-worth, and just how to figure out how life works and our place in it. There's such a victim mindset that is set in to the mainstream mental health narrative that it's creating more problems than it's providing solutions. There's this insane approach to life that says that we need to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. But we lose sight of the fact that we only have reason to take care of ourselves if we believe we have significance in the lives of those who are significant to us. And that's where things come crashing down, is that when we have reason to believe, or we convince ourselves that who we are is no longer relevant or is under threat of being insignificant, then all sorts of things go wrong. Because then we make others responsible for how we feel about ourselves. We make others responsible for our lack of relevance, for our lack of purpose in life. And that's how we end up coming up with all of these fancy terms that says that, oh, it's not my fault because I'm suffering from something. I'm suffering from depression. I'm suffering from anxiety. I'm suffering from bipolar disorder, or whatever it is. And then you've got some people, especially when it comes, like I saw a recent clip that talked about narcissism and how this person that was talking on this clip, that was being interviewed by someone on a podcast, was talking about how it is that narcissism is, there's a science to confirm that it is a result of a mother wound or some nonsense like that. And I say it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense because, firstly, there is absolutely no science to back up the theories of mental illness or mental disorders. And this is not just my take on it. You can research yourself independently, because I'm not here to present someone else's research. I'm here to present my argument from a critical perspective about why it is that I think we're losing the plot. Narcissism, for example, is a result of deep-seated insecurities. There is not a single person alive that doesn't have insecurities. And if given the right circumstances, those insecurities will prevail over our sense of self, over our sense of understanding or wisdom or agency. Agency being our ability to claim our dignity and our response to situations. So when we start claiming that narcissism is a mental illness, for example, and I want to deal with narcissism probably today because it's such a hot topic, it's such an abused term that is usually a source of abuse against people who are accused of being narcissistic just because people who are weak-minded or lack self-esteem are ready to blame someone else for the way they feel about themselves or the way they feel about life or how ineffective they are in their relationship. And usually if we can't get through to someone that we want to get through to, or that we must get through to, or that we can't imagine our life without, and we find ourselves struggling to get through to them, we usually blame them for it. We don't ever stop to consider what is our effectiveness in that. But coming back to the narcissism and the whole science about it, there is no science about narcissism. There is no science about human behavior, because the volume of variables that are at play in any given moment for any two individuals will be so vastly different and unique that you cannot apply a science to it. You can only derive themes from it. You can only look at it and think, well, what is it that is consistently underlying in a theme or in a tone or in the way something is perceived that causes that to happen? And when it changes, what is it that's changed about it that causes it to be different in some and while it's consistent in others? You can't bring that down to a science, because science is exact. Science is about, if something happens here, there will always be a consistent reaction there, because what we're doing here is always going to be the same, and what we're getting from there is always the same. So action, reaction kind of thing. So when it comes to narcissism and the deep-seated insecurities, those insecurities don't make us narcissists. It just means that we're struggling with insecurities. Now, the reason for those insecurities and what those insecurities relate to, that is where it gets really complicated. And it gets complicated because human beings are complicated. We're not simple beings. If we were simple beings, we wouldn't worry about purpose, we wouldn't worry about legacy, we wouldn't worry about significance, about social structure, about various classes and classism and all of those sorts of things, social stature and all of that. We're complicated beings. And when you want to try and whittle down and you want to try and reduce someone to a single label, that makes you pretty much narcissistic in your approach to life. Because you want to believe to have an authoritative view on how someone else is or why someone else is the way they are. And the moment you want to have that kind of a definitive response to someone else's behavior, that's more about you wanting to be right about them rather than understanding exactly what it is that's troubling them. And when you surrender yourself to this kind of thinking, when you surrender yourself to wanting to believe that there must be something wrong with you, that's why you can't figure something out, or you can't deal with something, or you might have social anxiety or something, then you don't give yourself any opportunity to deal with the actual reason for why you feel that way. Instead, what you do is you outsource that to the label, you outsource it to everyone else, because now you wear this badge saying that I suffer from X, Y, and Z, so that's why you must be sensitive and you must create space for me and you must understand where I'm at and you must avoid triggering me and all of that. And you suddenly make everyone else responsible for your emotional disposition, which is so stupid and so self-defeating that I can't understand how anyone can possibly frame that as good advice for mental health. What is mental health in the first place? Because mental health itself has got so many theories that are unfounded and unproven that it makes it reckless to trust that the theories in the mainstream about mental health are actually fact. So what does that do when it comes to trying to maintain healthy relationships if you're believing this mental health mainstream garbage? It means that you are going to create more problems than solutions. It means that you're going to focus on coping rather than overcoming. It means that you are going to look for compliance in your partner relative to a certain model or frame of reference that some mental health guru somewhere told you is what a healthy relationship looks like, and you're not going to see the human you're actually with. It means that you're not going to see who you really are. You're going to be framing yourself within the context of this external point of reference that tells you that this is why you are who you are. And that's why we lose the art of reflection and introspection and critical thinking. That's why we lose empathy and compassion, because then we think empathy and compassion looks like us making space for someone because we want to make space for them rather than appreciating why someone is in need of a certain kind of support or response or affection or whatever it is that they need from us. The biggest problem we have is that people want to be authoritative about why someone else is the way they are. And it gives us a sense of assurance, because it gives us the stature that people will look to say, okay, well, you seem to know what you're talking about, so you can tell me why it is that they're not behaving the way I want them to behave. It's like we got to a point now where we are attaching labels to the emotional disposition of children, while we discount completely the fact that children are entirely influenced and shaped by the emotional tones and themes from the primary caregivers and role models that they see around them in the environment. So where do we start? Where do we stop? It's such a crazy mess of insanity that it makes it difficult for any person to try and make sense of where to from here. We've gone through such a massive transition and change and shift in perspective and practice and social structures and things over the last 20 or 30 years that the wisdom of the ages is failing us. And it's failing us not because there's a lack of wisdom in it. It's failing us because with the massive transition of context in which we're living, we haven't had the insight or understanding about that wisdom that we could translate it into the contemporary context. So what I mean is that we look to previous generations and we think, well, they had it figured out because they got things right. They had more enduring relationships. They had more seemingly quality of life. They had more family cohesiveness. And they had a healthier social structure overall, but it's not really that. The reality is close to the fact that they lived in a time when there was very little that challenged the narrative of the village. And the narrative of the village is what influences our thinking about how it is that we relate to the person that's across the table from us or across the room from us. Because if we don't realize what it is that we're taking from that village, what it is that we need from that village, what it is that the village is perpetuating or influencing or instigating that might conflict with what we want for ourselves, if we're not mindful about those things, then guess what? Everything feels like a struggle. Everything feels like a fight for survival. And that's how we then end up being adversaries with the people that we're in a relationship with, rather than being partners or companions or collaborators in what it is that we're trying to achieve. And this is most important when it comes to families. Because the family unit, the weaker it is, the weaker the community is, the weaker the community is, the weaker society is, and so on. And that's how we end up with this global mental health crisis. And that brings me to another point, is that if the mainstream mental health narrative was on point, if it was true, if it was grounded in a reality that is relatable and that answers the problems for us, provides us with meaningful solutions, I would argue that we now have more mental health practitioners available per capita, per person alive, than we've ever had in the history of mankind. Which means that if that is true, that proportion is true, we should be in our best mental health state as the global population than we ever were before, or even as a community or a society or even as a family unit. But the reverse is proving to be true. Instead, what we're finding is more depression, more anxiety, more emotional duress, more social strain in relationships. But no one's stopping to question whether or not what we're being advised about or what we're being taught about how we work as humans, the human experience, if that is actually on point. We've become so selfish and individualistic in the way we've approached things that we've now shaped mental health around the individual experience rather than the communal experience. And before someone tells me I'm a socialist or something stupid like that, the communal experience, the experience we have with the people around us, is infinitely more important in what it is that we experience for ourselves. And I'll tell you why. Because there is not a single person alive that doesn't want to believe or have reason to believe that their presence matters in the lives of those who matter to them. And the people who don't have people around them that matter to them, they take more strain than people who actually have a bad relationship with the people that do matter to them. And we need to qualify that. I'm not saying it's a blanket rule. But the point is that if we're not part of a social structure that we feel like we make a difference to, then whether it's directly or indirectly, then we lose purpose in life, and then we question our existence, and we wonder what's the point of it being here, of us being here. So when we act selfishly, when we focus on what we need, we'll then focus on acquiring things. And when we acquire those things, once we've acquired it, there'll be no sweetness to it. It will be like, okay, cool, I got that, now what's next? So we get the flashy car, okay, got that, now what's next? Another flashy car, maybe a bigger house, maybe more flashy labels that we wear or trinkets that we adorn ourselves with. Or maybe we then need to move into the right neighborhoods and shop in the right restaurants and shop in the right social spots. And we're always chasing to make sure that we're still relevant through what we have. But when we act on behalf of others, we don't care about what we have, we care about what we feel when we see that our contribution has uplifted someone else. It has brought a smile to someone else's face, it has brought joy to someone else's face or their life. Or when we see that even though they may not immediately appreciate it, but we know intrinsically with substance that what we've done for them has alleviated their condition that they will appreciate later in life. And that's pretty much parenting 101. So when you act selfishly, when you focus on the individual over and above the benefit of the community or the group around them, you destroy all of that. You undermine our social bonds that feeds our soul. And that's another thing, because the mainstream mental health narrative is ridiculous enough to suggest that we don't have anything other than our physical body, which is a debate for another time. And that in itself is actually the root of our problems, is that we've separated consciousness from the physical state that we find ourselves in, and then we look at the physical state and we assume that there is no consciousness beyond that. Whatever happens to us is contained within the body. We know this is not true. Anyone who spends any time reflecting would be able to understand that that is not true, because the science just doesn't agree with it. And we'll come back to that. So back to this point about narcissism, and I'm kind of all over the place because everything is interlinked in some way or another. And that's the point of mental health when it comes to our well-being emotionally and socially, is that everything is connected. How we felt as a child is connected to how we feel as an adult. How we treat our children is how we feel as a parent. How our children respond to us is how it is that we feel validated or appreciated or effective or relevant or significant, and so on. And same thing at work. We're always part of a social structure or power structure of some sort that we want to feel as if we're a meaningful contributor to it. The moment we're not a meaningful contributor to it, we're going to focus on acquiring things to demonstrate how effective and how amazing we are, so that we can gain other people's respect or admiration or their celebration of who we are. And that's when life becomes empty. So narcissism is not a thing. And I'll say that quite categorically, because, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, but I'm not here to be agreeable. Narcissism is literally a state we find ourselves in, or we find someone else in, if the chips are stacked against them, if what it is that they need to feel adequate or significant is not available, so it provokes all of their insecurities, their demons from their past. And those demons are established long, long before we reach a sense of self-awareness. And that's part of the problem, is that we're holding people to their behavior, assuming that they are mindful and deliberate and conscious about why it is that they're doing what they're doing. And I'll disprove that in one simple example. We know the harms of smoking. There's decades of research and publicity campaigns and all sorts of things to educate us about why it is that smoking is harmful, to the point where we now pick up a packet of cigarettes and you'll see on the packet it says, "This will kill you," or "This will cause cancer," "This will harm your child if you're pregnant," etc. Yet people pick it up, they look at it, they flip it over, and they take out a cigarette and they light up anyway. Now, mainstream mental health approach to that is stop smoking. Or if you can't stop smoking, then find a way to distract yourself from smoking. It also makes the assumption that someone who is smoking is then willfully wanting to harm themselves. Willfully. They know they're harming themselves. It's like people who binge eat, who have unhealthy diets or unhealthy lifestyles. They know it's not good for them. But it doesn't mean that they have what is needed to be able to avoid falling into those traps. So when a person lights up a cigarette, you can say you need to stop smoking. And if I was in that position, I would say, duh. I know I need to stop smoking. But if it was as simple as just stop smoking, then we'd have no one that has any vices in this world, because everyone will be able to just exercise their free will, their agency, and stop doing what it is that they shouldn't be doing. But life isn't that simple. But that's exactly what happens when we label people. We assume that they have the will and the consciousness and the awareness to be able to suddenly just stop doing what it is that others around them find harmful or abusive or whatever it is. Again, reminding you that seeking to understand is not about making excuses. It's about understanding why, so that we can respond to the why rather than responding to the behavior. And that's the problem, is that if you're going to keep challenging the behavior, if you're going to keep challenging the defense mechanisms, you're just going to be exacerbating the problem, because you are giving someone reason to believe that they have good reason to protect themselves, to defend themselves, because that's what the defense mechanism is for. It's to protect myself from a vulnerability that I don't want someone else to exploit. So responding to the behavior is just the start. It's not the end. And that's where we lose it, is that we start with challenging the behavior and we stop at that point. because we expect compliance, we expect cooperation. We don't ever try to consider why it is that someone might be behaving in that way, because the why is more important. Because when we understand the why, we see the human. We don't see the labels of narcissism and bipolar and anxiety and depression. We see the human experience behind it. So if I've got good reason to feel despondent or depressed about the fact that something important to me, I have no hope of it ever being resolved or accomplished or available to me, then I've got good reason to be depressed. It's not because I'm suffering from depression, it's because I've got a legitimate reason to feel depressed. Now, if that goes on for long enough and I remain functional because I have demands placed on me and I've got life that's happening and I need to eat and provide for myself and whatever it is, then I will eventually lose sight of why it was that I was depressed, and I'll just grow accustomed to the belief that there's no point in I shouldn't hope for that, because it's just either never going to work, I'm never going to have it, or I'm just going to set myself up for more failure or betrayal or disappointment again. So that's how we then protect ourselves from making ourselves available to something that previously caused us harm or hurt or pain. And then someone else comes along and they look at us and they think, well, you're suffering from depression, here, take a pill. No, you're not suffering from depression. You just might have lost yourself to the hopelessness of a situation that you experienced that was so important and critical to your sense of self and your sense of belonging to the social structure that is important to you, that it overwhelmed you and it overwhelmed your sense of reason. And that's what humans are about. Our emotions overwhelm our sense of reason, and then we behave badly. We behave destructively, or even in a way that is self-destructive or self-defeating. And then we come along and we give them a label and we forget that. And then people, because of desperation to find answers, and they can't find answers, they buy into these labels. For good reason, because they're looking for relief. They buy into these labels, but what they don't realize is that when you buy into the label, you abdicate accountability for your state. You give up your agency, you give up your ability to be able to do something about it. Because now you start conditioning yourself to behave within the construct that has been put forward to you about why it is that you are the way you are. And then we come up with all sorts of ridiculous terms that we then apply to people like that, and they willingly subscribe to it because they have no other options to figure it out. So then you get the neurodivergence, and you get the autistic spectrum, and you get all the anxieties and disorders, and you name it, they've got a term for it. And in all of that, the one thing that they haven't recognized is that there's a human behind that behavior. And we've lost sight of the human behind the behavior. We expect people to show up in a role because that is what we believe was promised to us when they agreed to fill that role for us. That's why relationships go bad. Most people don't even know what to love, how to love these days, because they think that as long as they're getting all of those amazing things from their partner, and that means their partner loves them. And then in return, they need to do all of the things that makes their partner feel good, and they think that that shows that they love their partner. No, that's just a transaction. It's not love. Love is a consequence of two humans seeing each other and appreciating what they see in each other. What they see in each other, not what they get from each other. And we've lost the art of that. We've lost the art of being able to understand how it is that someone else feels in our presence. We have lost sight of the impact that we have on others. We've lost sight of the impact that others have on us, because we don't see the impact that they have as a human on us. We see what it is that we're not getting from them that infuriates us or makes us feel despondent or sad or enraged because we feel betrayed. And then we respond to that as if we justify it, because we assume that our assumption about how it is that they're dealing with things is correct, because we've got nothing to tell us otherwise. And then the mainstream narrative comes along and says, yeah, he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. And that's why you must get yourself out of it. It's an abusive relationship and all that nonsense. It's not. If someone is a narcissist, here's the crux of it. If I insist that someone is a narcissist, right, let's assume that that is now supposedly an accurate definition of that individual, then I can't expect more from them, because they're suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. Now look at the hypocrisy in that. On the one hand, I'm saying you're suffering from something that's out of your control because you're suffering from NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. But on the other hand, I'm saying that the fact that you're suffering from NPD or narcissistic personality disorder doesn't abdicate your accountability to show up for me the way I need you to show up for me. Which one is it? They're either suffering from it and therefore are incapable of it, so you should adjust your expectations and treat them kindly because that's your love language and all of that nonsense. Or they don't suffer from it and you just need to label them because you don't know how else to get through to them, because that makes you feel inadequate if you don't label them. So when we accuse someone of suffering from something, why don't we also adjust our expectations in line with that by being more empathetic and more sensitive about what it is that they're suffering from, so that we can help them emerge from it? Is it asking for too much? I think we're opportunistic, and that in a nutshell is mainstream mental health, mainstream psychology. It's opportunistic in nature. It's opportunistic to try and create a victim out of someone's bad life experience, and then to show up as a savior, to give them coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms, and to frame the rest of their social structures or their relationships as being this threat to their well-being and their happiness, so that they can go and become more selfish and idealistic about how it is that they need to claim their space and protect themselves from all of these evil influences and people around them. That's opportunism, and it's victim mindset of the worst kind, because that's what destroys families, that's what destroys individuals, that's what destroys the bond between parents and children. So there's a fine line between the impact that we have as parents on our children, and that's what shapes their sense of self, versus our best effort towards our children within the context of our life, and what they take from that and what they assume to be true about why it is that we can't be more than that. And not just between parent and child, that is basically true for every relationship. If we assume that someone else is capable of something that they themselves believe they're not capable of, and we demand it from them, we don't try to understand why they might have difficulty with it. We demand that they show up in that way. All we're doing is we're provoking their fears of inadequacy, and they're going to come out fighting. They're going to come out in a way that we're not going to appreciate, because it feels like we're demanding something from them that they're not comfortable with. And that's the point. We don't see each other anymore. We only see what we need from each other. And as long as both parties are getting a reasonable amount from each other, then the transaction balances, and that's why you don't have love, or you don't have empathy or compassion. Because when someone is taking strain and it makes it difficult for them to fulfill their role, you don't see why they're taking strain. You judge them for taking strain because, like, why don't you just own it? Why don't you man up? Or why don't you be the feminist that you want to be, or whatever it is? It's absolute. It's ludicrous. When do we start seeing the human again? When do we start recognizing that we're human and they're human, and between those two spaces, we need to create understanding, and through understanding, you develop empathy. If you're going to do everything rules-based, which is what mental health is all about, the mainstream mental health thing is about rules. If you demonstrate this, that, and that behavioral patterns, then that means you suffer from that. Humans are not that simple. We never have been, we never will be. And if you're going to keep trying to reduce everyone down to a label in the mental health space, I guarantee you're going to get more people behaving badly. You're going to get more self-destructive behavior. You're going to get more self-indulgent behavior. You're going to get more strained relations. You're going to get less fulfillment in life. And we're going to continue on the slippery slope that we stepped on when we started believing that mental illness is a thing. Because if mental illness is a thing, then please show me a clinical diagnosis of it. Clinical, medical, physical evidence that proves that it is. Don't show me the consequence of someone's emotional disposition and say that that proves that they're suffering from something, because that's the ridiculousness of it. We look at how someone is behaving, and the behavior then is used as a reason to believe that they're suffering from that behavior. How stupid is that? No, we behave a certain way because we experience something that is causing us duress. Sometimes we understand what that something is, and the fear or the lack of understanding of how to overcome it is what weighs us down. And sometimes we don't know. We just feel a certain way when something happens because we've buried some experience so far in the back of our minds that we just don't want to consider it because it just feels too uncomfortable or too hurtful to go back there. That doesn't make us suffering from a mental illness. It means that we have emotional duress because we're human and something hit us in a way that we don't know how to process. That's the point. When are we going to start seeing the human behind the role? When are you going to look at your child and see that there's a human struggling to find their place in this world, struggling to feel significant in your presence, struggling to feel as if they are a meaningful part of your life? When are you going to see that instead of seeing a child that's just disobedient? Or when are you going to see a parent that you think let you down while you don't consider what it is that they were struggling with, and despite their struggles, they put in what they could to be able to show up in the way that they did? We're so busy judging people that we forget that you will be tested by that which you judge others about. Go ahead and look at your life, reflect on it, and you'll see at some point what you're struggling with now. You assumed that someone else was failing at it because they were just incompetent or useless or uninterested or falling short or something or the other, because you thought you could do it better than them, or you thought that they weren't good enough for you or something or the other. That's a judgment. And when you stop judging and start understanding, life takes on a very, very different tone, a very different flavor, and fulfillment then becomes possible. So there's so much to be said on the subject, and we can rabbit hole in all sorts of directions. But I guess the long and short of today's episode is that don't subscribe to the labels of narcissism and bipolar this and depression that and all of that. Yes, we experience narcissistic behavioral traits. We experience bipolar kind of behavior that we observe in someone else, but someone is not behaving that way because they're bipolar. They're behaving that way because they are volatile in their emotional space because of fears and experiences and false hope and all of that. It's a combination of all of those things that come to bear on us in a single moment that causes us to behave in a way that appears irrational to someone else. Every single one of us is looking to be understood, looking to be seen, looking to be heard. We're not looking to just comply. We don't want to be just boxed into a little space and be pretty and cooperative in that space so that people will like us. Because that doesn't feel like acceptance, it doesn't feel like significance, it feels like compliance. And that's where we fall short. People are looking for everyone around them to comply to a certain model and a certain expectation without wanting to put in the work to create understanding. We don't even have empathy anymore. You think I'm lying? Look at what's happening around the world. Look at the genocide that we're seeing unfolding in real time, and we're still trying to explain away why it is that it's understandable for the aggressors to be committing genocide. Where have we lost our humanness, our humanity, our dignity, our self-respect? We lost it to the labels that mainstream mental health is asking us to impose on ourselves and on others in our efforts to try to understand what it's like to be human. And that's what we need. We need a renaissance of humanity, of humanness, not more mental health garbage. Because mental health in its current state is the most destructive thing that has ever faced humanity. Because when you take away someone's agency for who they are in life, you make them dependent on solution providers to feel okay about themselves. And you make it okay for others to be treated badly if they threaten that sense of self that you've now established with your mental health model in a victim. Victims make the worst oppressors. The more victims you create, the more oppressors you're going to have. And that's why humanity sucks as it does right now. No one's a narcissist. We might all have insecurities that make us behave badly, but it doesn't make us a narcissist. It just means that we have insecurities that we need someone to understand or someone to reassure us about. And just because they don't understand and we don't understand doesn't mean it cannot be figured out. It just means that we don't understand the problem well enough. That's why we don't have a solution. But coming up with labels and these fallacies of coping mechanisms and things like that, That's not a solution. That's a deflection from the original problem, because it's that uncomfortable for us to show up as humans these days, because we are so used to being able to just show up with a drop of wisdom here and a fancy quote there and a little meme here and look for the reactions and assume that that is validation of the wisdom in what it is that we're offering. It isn't. The popular vote is what reflects what is the prevailing mentality of the people around us. And if you're going to go through life looking to see how many people agree with you and take from that as being why you're right, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of pain. Because in the absence of that agency I keep talking about, you won't have critical thinking. Because you're going to look to see what supports your argument. You're not going to understand why it supports your argument or what it implies when you subscribe to that. And that's what we need to take back. Critical thinking, self-awareness, mindfulness, not meditation, not yoga, not all of these spiritual practices, but true mindfulness, understanding in the moment so that we don't contaminate the present moment with the past or the future with the anxiety about what the past taught us. That's what we need. And the current approach to mental health is not going to give you that, because the current approach to mental health is self-serving. We're not here to serve ourselves. There's not a single person that feels fulfilled when they serve no one but themselves. That's why everyone is looking to make a splash on a bigger scale so that they can have reach beyond their own personal needs. And if they don't have that reach to people that are significant to them, no matter how many adoring fans they've got out there, life will be empty. And then they'll be self-destructive eventually. That's who we are. That's being human. You need to believe that your presence makes a difference. And if your presence doesn't make a difference, it's either because you are not paying attention to the right things and you're lacking awareness of the difference that you do make, or it's because you're applying yourself in a space that is just not for you. You're looking for validation in the wrong places. And if you know who you are and you know what you're about and what value you want to contribute, you'll create opportunity to be able to contribute that value. You won't wait for someone to give you permission or to create a space for you. You'll create your own spaces. And that's how we serve others, and we get that sense of fulfillment about being human. The next time someone calls you a narcissist, smile and walk away. That's all you got to do. Don't debate it, because that's a projection of their insecurities. No matter how sincere and endearing they might seem in concern about you, by saying that you're a narcissist and this is what help you need to get. The whole point of being a significant other is not so that you can label someone and send them somewhere else for help. It's about understanding and working through things together so that you can figure out why it is that someone might be behaving badly or struggling to show up in the way that you know they would want to. Every single one of us wants to be someone else's hero. We want to be someone else's amazing other. We want to be someone else's reason to smile. And if we feel insecure about being all of that or being enough, we then provoke and incite and antagonize and trigger and all those other sorts of things, because we need a reaction, because a reaction tells us we're not yet irrelevant. We have to rethink our understanding of how people work, because the mainstream is destroying that understanding. I'm Zaid Ismail, and I'm hoping that we can do this again sometime soon.